Ow. It's June. It's the end of June. I'm recording this on about the 24th of June, which means it's halfway through the year at some point now, then, might have been, don't know when, but it's about halfway through the year. So what I thought I'd do is I thought I would give you an update on what my favourite books of the year so far have been. Now, as you can tell, there's quite a few, hence why I was like punching myself in the face with them at the start. What is there? 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 books in here. And then I've got 2 more that I need to include as well, which I don't have physical copies of because I've either lent them to people or literally one of them I just don't know where it is anymore. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be narrowing it down to 11 books that I have absolutely adored already this year. And we're only in June. I know if I don't film this video quick enough, it's going to be July already. So stay tuned. So these books are in absolutely no order. They're not in kind of priority order. They're not in order that I read them in. They're just literally on a pile on my floor right now. And I'm going to pick them up from what's on the top and work my way down because that's natural. The first book is In Memoriam by Alice Wynne. Now, In Memoriam by Alice Wynne is a heartbreaking tale. It's about essentially 2 men that start off quite young in a school together. It's like a private boys' school. And they essentially realise, I think, that they're both gay. Well, I know they're both gay, but they essentially realise that with each other. Then what happens is the war comes along. So this is set in late 1914 and the war comes along and it separates them into 2 different areas in the war. Then what ensues is how the war affects them. So really interesting look into the psyche of the men that were affected by the war, not just physically, because yes, physically, a lot of people came out and weren't the same as when they went into the war, but also mentally, those that possibly weren't affected in any physical way, but were mentally affected by the traumas of being part of a battle, being locked away, being away from your family at such a young age, losing loved ones so quickly and kind of making friends so quickly and then losing them straight away. And that's what In Memoriam is about. It's about that kind of separation. It's about the love that they have for one another that's deeper than their kind of long journey, and it's essentially about how war changes you. It's sad, it's brilliantly written. Sometimes you're not going to go into this and come out feeling all light and fluffy, but it was a fantastic read. So that's In Memoriam by Alice Wynne. The next book is River East, River West by Aubrey Lescure. Now, this book was a book I was actually really kindly sent by a publisher. One of the last books I said I was happy to be sent. At the moment, I'm saying no to people because I just don't have the space physically, but also time in my life to read them. But anyway, this was a book that I said I was happy to receive. It's actually gone on to be shortlisted for a women's, do they call it Booker Prize or something like this? Women's Author Prize. So it is good. You know it's good when it gets nominated for stuff. And I can tell you now, it's good. It's essentially about 2 tandem storylines. One, I think, in 1980s China and one in kind of mid-noughties China. And it focuses on a young girl who's in the mid-noughties China and a young man who then grows up. So we follow his through decades story in 1980s China. And it talks about the kind of different impacts that China had on them at the time. Now, I've not looked into the history of China and how realistic this is, whether it is what happened in China or whether it's the opposite of what happened in China. I have a feeling that it's the opposite of what happened. But either way, these 2 characters essentially meet later on. So the person you're reading about back in the 1980s does go on to have an impact on the person in the noughties. You find that out very early on, so that's not a spoiler. But it was just really interestingly written. It's one of those books where I remember reading it being like, not a lot is happening. We're not talking about fast-paced, constant action, short chapters, thriller, bang, bang, bang sort of book here. What we're talking about is a book where the characters are so deeply enjoyable and not even nice, kind, funny, those sort of enjoyable, just really well written that you want to know more about them. You want them to do well because of some of the hardships that they're facing. But essentially, you just want to read about them. And that's what you get to do in River East, River West. Was really impressed by this. I wasn't expecting to like it, and I remember reading it thinking, I don't know why I'm liking this so much. I just want to keep picking it up because I'm really invested in these 2 people's story. And I think that's a combination of Lescure's writing, but I also think it's a combination of just being interested in the characters and the world that they were set in. So that's River East, River West by Aubrey Lescure. I hope I'm kind of not butchering that name, by the way, because I could be. The next book on this list is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. Now, this is a book that's been around the block. Everybody's talked about it. I know this was a thing way before I was even got back into books and got back into reading. And I heard it was really, really good. And I thought it was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. So for a quick kind of synopsis, Eleanor Oliphant is a woman who has some sort of ism, is on the spectrum in some sense. She struggles with your social interaction. She doesn't know when people are laughing at her or with her. She doesn't get jokes. She's quite literal about things. And then a man comes along who essentially helps her navigate life, is probably the nicest way of being able to say it. He comes along and takes her into social situations she's never been on before, gives her the confidence to do things and possibly be a person she's never been before. But what's happening at the same time is she is slowly, as a part of this kind of unlocking of her social attributes, she is also unlocking memories of a dark past that she had mentally locked away. She's got a mother who's in prison, who is just horrible to her the whole time, says horrible things to her, puts her confidence down, and you can kind of see why she's so low in confidence. And then, as I said, what's happening is you're kind of unlocking this story in the background as well, which kind of explains why. Really, really interesting, really well written, and quite funny at times because of the way that she interacts with other people. I think Honeyman has written it so it's quite comedic. I don't think it's mean to laugh at it. It's just sometimes she'll say something and the character she is with will also laugh because that's just not how you kind of say or respond or something like this. So really, really enjoyed this. It's one of those front covers as well that's just become quite, I don't know, synonymous with the book as well. It's quite interesting. It's quite poignant. The actual front cover here suggests what goes on. But either way, really, really enjoyed this. So that's the third book on this list. The next book is The List of Suspicious Things by Jenny Godfrey. Now, this was, again, incredibly kindly sent to me by Jenny herself. I asked at the start of year for you to pick 12 books that I should read, or everyone should pick one book, and then I'm going to pick 12 of the best, or 12 of the most liked. And I went and did that, and this was one of those books. Jenny then saw this, reached out and said, would you like me to send you a copy? And I said, yes, very much. Thank you very much. Really, really interesting. Love this book. Also stunning front cover. The story is 1979. There's a young girl called Miv, and it is during the time of the Yorkshire Ripper killings. And everything is kind of in turmoil. Yorkshire itself is very, very dark and very scary. You're not supposed to go after a certain time. If you're a woman, you're treated awfully because women shouldn't be provoking men into attacking and killing them, should they? No. What we then have is essentially Miv goes off and she decides to write lists to try and help her find out who the Yorkshire Ripper is. Spoiler, she doesn't. But what does ensue is she uses these lists to just find out some dark things about people in her town, about places that happened or where things happened, and it essentially is really, really heartwarming. And then there's a moment that I was just not expecting. The whole book was kind of, I don't know, nicely jogging along. Yes, things weren't great, and we have to deal with Miv kind of growing up and her friend finding boys and finding them a bit more interesting, and Miv being like, okay, but what about me? These sort of things. But what's more interesting is there's a moment in it where I was like, okay, as if you just did that, Jenny. As if you just did that. I can't believe you just done that to us, the reader of this book. But really, really impressive. Nicely written, as I said, fantastic front cover, and one of my favourite reads of the year. It was shocking me, really, how good this one, or it shocked me. It's not shocking me. It shocked me how good this was. It's also Jenny Godfrey's debut novel, so look out for anything more that she does. Now, I said at the start, I didn't want to kind of put these in any sort of order, but The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne is probably my favourite book of the year so far. So if you had to stick one in number one, it's this one. The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne is about a man called Cyril, who, kind of similar to In Memoriam, at a young age realises he's gay. The reason for this is a chap called Julian comes along and is like, hi, let's hang out. And Cyril's like, holy shit, I think I'm gay. And essentially what then happens is about the dark and difficult times that Cyril has to face. So he lives in Ireland at the time. Is it Ireland or Northern Ireland? One of the islands. Everything is very, very difficult for him. Being gay during the 60s, I think it is, right through to modern day, I think it reaches 2010s, early 2010s, is very, very difficult for him. But what you do see is you do see some progress in the story. You do see him see the progress. It becomes far more accepted, of course. It's a very dark story. A lot of bad things happen to Cyril, a lot of sad moments, some really dark moments as well, that if this has been a struggle for you in your own personal life, you may find quite triggering or quite upsetting to read. It's a fantastically written story. John Boyne, I'd not read anything by him before. I say that, though I do think I possibly read The Boy in Striped Pyjamas when I was very young. or at school or something like that, but I can't remember it. But this was really, really fantastic. The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne was a story I will never forget. It's a story that takes you literally on a journey of decades, literally from little Cyril in the womb, very, very impressive, that piece of story writing, right through to the day that he is incredibly old, has grandchildren, and everybody's around him, and he's loved and all this sort of stuff, and it's fantastic. The front cover is beautiful, the book is beautiful, it's one of my favourite books of the year so far. It'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, it'll make you wish you could hold Cyril and push Cyril to achieve more and all sorts of things. It's a genuinely fantastic book, and if you could read one of the books on this list, this would probably be the one that I'd recommend reading. Utterly, utterly fantastic. The next book on this list is One Day by David Nicholls. Now, if I had to have a second, I would probably say this was my second place. One Day became massive back at the start of the year because a Netflix series came out about it, and everyone was like, oh, I've not yet read the book, I'll go read the book. Or they had read the book when they were much younger, saw the TV series, and the TV series absolutely nailed the kind of themes and the youth and the kind of characters that are in One Day. If you don't know, it's a story about Dexter and Emma. Starts off in 1988, they meet at a graduation party, and then what ensues is their kind of intertwining lives. They deeply care for one another. Sometimes they even end up being and kind of living and kind of being in a romantic relationship with other people, but at the end of the day, they just keep coming back to each other. And sometimes you think, is it love? Is it friendship? Is it devotion? Is it comfort? What is it? And all those stories and all those kind of elements are brought into One Day. It's so wonderfully written. It's a book that I can tell you now kept me shook for so long afterwards. There's a chapter at the end, and if you've read it, or you'll know what I mean, that really, it just, John Boyne had no right to write. It was incredibly painful to read. It made me think about it for a while. It made me want to watch the Netflix series, which then brought up the horrible moment once again and the incredible sadness. But I don't want to spoil it too much. If you've not read One Day by David Nicholls, it genuinely is a brilliant book of two young people growing slightly older together through from the 80s to the 90s to the noughties, and what happens around them in the world, what happens with them as people, how they develop, how ideally, and I think the general story is that they stay the same. Deep down, they're still the same people they were when they were younger. It's brilliant. It's utterly fantastic. This would be, I have to say, yeah, second place in my book of the years so far. So another book that was kindly sent to me by an author as part of my follower book picks was Sea State by J.M. Simpson. This was recommended to me by you lot, and it was fantastic. So Jo, who is J.M. Simpson, is lovely on social media. I've spoken to her a couple of times about her different books as well. I do have the second one that I want to read. Sea State itself starts off and talks of Doug and Jess. Jess had a horrible situation happen to her in a previous job, and she's changed job and she's moved on now, and she works with Doug. Doug is having a horrible situation at home. His wife just doesn't seem to care about him or the kids or the family or their life anymore. And he's like, why? What's going on? What have I done wrong? And she's not talking to him about it. And this pushes Jess and Doug to slightly get a bit closer than maybe they would have liked. What's happening at the same time is there are kind of small moments at the end of some of the chapters where you find out that the person that possibly hurt Jessie before is still around and still watching her, which really kept me reading, because as soon as I knew that, I thought, yeah, I definitely want to keep reading because I need to know what's going to happen here. Is everything going to end up being bad and all this sort of stuff? But it really, really was impressive. And I think this is Jo's debut novel. I think it's the first in a series. I know there's at least 5, maybe 6 of these already, which is fantastic because I'm looking forward to reading the follow-up books to these. But that's Sea State by J.M. Simpson. The next book is The Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. Weirdly themed, I keep saying this now, but this was also kindly sent to me. I'm not just picking books that people have sent to me to say thank you and send me more books. This was generally fantastic. So this was sent to me by somebody on Instagram, and they said this was one of their favourite books of all time. They wanted me to read it because they wanted to hear my opinions on it. I was honest. I said the first kind of half of the book, I was like, I don't get it. It's just a kind of cowboy novel. It's quite slow. Nothing that dramatic's happening, the characters aren't that great. But then something kicked in about halfway through where I thought, holy crap, this is good. The characters started showing emotion, they started caring about people, they started having these kind of thoughts of family and love and loss and, okay, I actually do like you, even though I've suggested I don't like you the whole time. And they start saying, oh no, I do want to settle down, even though I'm this independent, angry person the whole time. At the same time, I'm falling in love with the characters at that point. It's really, really interesting. The story itself is broad and quite sweeping. Essentially, what we get is a group of cowboys move from one space to another, if in simple. That's what's happening. But obviously, what happens as a result of that is they then journey across not only miles, but they journey through different stories. They have different things happen to them. As I said, having a book that's so long, this was nearly 900 pages long, you can include a lot of different storylines in here. And I think McMurtry's covered everything in here. As I said, he covers love, loss, children, getting old, family, changes, growing up, maturity, development. All of these sort of things are covered in here. And it really, really was a lovely, lovely read. And it's one of those books that the more I read it, the more I enjoyed it. And sometimes I have an opinion of a book and it doesn't change. Sometimes I have an opinion of a book and it switches. But this is just one of those books where it literally just grew on me so much the more I read it, to the point where I finished it and I thought, fantastic book. And a week later, having not picked it up again, having finished it, I thought it's even better than I thought it was. It just really was brilliant. Lovely, lovely book. Loved Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. So this is the last physical book I have with me, and I'm going to point for the next two, like some sort of CGI the hell out of this thing, like some sort of Marvel film. Anyway, the first one is The Whalebone Theater by Joanna Quinn. Now, this was one of the first books I read in the year. It was actually, again, one of my follower book picks. This covers the story of a little girl who starts off young and has a father, and then a stepmom comes along, and they have a couple of kids, giving her siblings, and then her and her siblings go off and they find a whale carcass and they want to build a theatre in it. They do. They then have the Whalebone Theatre, but then war comes along and kind of ruins that for them, forces them to grow up, forces them to change as people. It's very heartbreaking at times. It's very kind of poignant. It's very down to earth. It forces you then to grow up, as I said. And it was just a fantastic, fantastic book. And again, this is another debut novel, Joanna Quinn's debut novel, and she's done some very brave things in here. You could easily just sit down and write a book from A to B and fill in the blanks when your editor says so. What she's decided to do is include kind of like pamphlets and letters and little different bits of things in here that add kind of character and world building to the story, which really, really impressed me as well. It is also maybe one of the best looking covers of the year. There are obviously different variations, but this one's stunning. Really, really love the front cover. But Whalebone Theater was just fantastic. And as I said, one of my favourite books of the year. So if you've not read The Whalebone Theater by Joanna Quinn yet, I'd highly recommend it. Wonderful writing, wonderful characters, a brilliant, brilliant story that will keep you interested throughout. And it's got your kind of heart kind of in the palm of your hand, ready to make you sad if it wants to make you sad, and it does make you sad. So the next two books, as I said, I don't actually have physical copies for, so I can't do the whole, oh, there's a book in my hand thing. But what instead, as I said, I'm going to do is I'm going to Marvel the shit out of this. And shabang! The first book we're going to talk about is None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. So I'm not a big thriller person, or I wasn't in 2023. In 2024, can love them. Absolutely love a thriller. Don't know why, just do. Maybe because they're easy to read. Maybe because they have short chapters. Maybe because they get me, I'm like, oh God, what's going on? Brilliant. None of This Is True is the best I've read probably ever in the thriller genre. Lisa Jewell is probably the queen of thrillers at the moment in terms of not only capacity, but also quality. None of This Is True tells the story of two women. They are birth twins. That's how they meet in a pub one night. They're birth twins. One of them is a semi-famous podcast host who has some decent following on social media. The other one is just a mum. And then just a mum says, I'd like to be on your podcast and talk about my life because I actually have quite an interesting life. And then what unfolds and what is kind of uncovered is some very, very dark things in this woman's life. We then start to follow more kind of from the podcast host's point of view and hear her perception on everything. And what's really interesting about it is you do get clips of the podcast and the potential Netflix series that would come as a result of the story that happens. If you listen to the audiobook, I would highly recommend listening to it on audiobook because you hear the podcast in podcast format. There is also a podcast you can go and listen to, which is extracted from the audiobook. There is also going to be a Netflix series, though I don't know whether it's going to cover it as we're doing a podcast and we're looking back at the Netflix, or we're just going to do a Netflix. I don't know. But either way, None of This Is True is fantastic. It's very, very dark. It's very, very creepy. The things kind of get twisted. I'm quite hard to shock, but there was two twists in here. I was like, it twisted back then twisted forward, then twisted back again, and there was a final chapter that twisted again, and you're like, I just don't know who the good or the bad guy is and why everybody, what I should be doing here. But either way, loved it. Thought it was one of the best, as I said, thrillers I've ever read. It was really, really fantastic. I came out of it like with my mouth wide open and my jaw on the floor. Really, really fantastic. Was None of This Is True by Lisa Joy. So I'd recommend that one. Can't hold it up, but it's right there. So just look at it, just there. Bam! I'm in a different space now. I'm over here. I was over there. Bam! This is Gentleman in Moscow by Immortals. I told you this was going to be like a Marvel movie, this video. Anyway, A Gentleman in Moscow by Immortals was a book that I randomly picked up one lunch walk. I had no audiobook to listen to. I think I just finished one. I thought I need something. And it was the only thing I had where I was like, I know I have the physical copy at home and I've got the audiobook here. Let's get this started. And it turned out, as you can tell, to be one of my favourite books of the year. It really, really was fantastic. It tells the story of a gentleman, I think he's a count, who commits a crime and then has to stay in a hotel as part of his crime. You'd think, oh, that sounds horrible, he's stuck, he's kind of housebound, but he ends up meeting a load of different people. He ends up getting in some scraps, he ends up meeting some wonderful young children, ends up hearing some fantastic stories, just meeting some lovely, lovely people. He himself is brilliant. He's, as I said, kind of a gentleman, which means he's not rude, he's not pompous. He speaks to people of the lowest class the exact same way he speaks to people of the highest class. He respects everybody, and that's what a true gentleman is, and that's the message I think Tolles is getting across here in the story, really. And his interactions with people are just so lovely, so humbling, so down to earth. And it was just a really, really nice book to read. And it caused me, I think, to put out a TikTok story where I talked about what is that kind of genre where nothing that bad happens, nothing that great happens. It's just a lovely book about a lovely character. What's that called? I don't know. But Gentleman in Moscow would be in that genre. So I'd highly recommend reading that if you've not yet given it a chance. If you've seen some people recommending it and you're not sure yet, and my opinion, you give a damn about my opinion, you know now that A Gentleman in Moscow is definitely worth giving a read. That is A Gentleman in Moscow by Immortals, the final book on this list of the best books I've read in 2024. So far. There are all my books that I have read so far this year that I thought were utterly fantastic. I've read more books than this. These were just the best ones, that's what I meant. This is very heavy. I'm also missing 2 books on this list. It is also the day, this is being filmed on the day that it is 25, 26 degrees. I don't have the window open because I'm paranoid about my neighbours hearing what I'm talking about whilst I'm talking. So it's very hot in here, so I'm going to wrap up this video. Anyway, thank you for watching. Let me know which of these you've read. Let me know if any of these are your favourite books. This book's not in line. There we go. Let me know if you didn't like any of them, if any of them weren't your favourite book. I don't know, just comment something below because I'm getting a bit delirious now because it's so warm in this room. Either way, if you've not yet subscribed, I'd appreciate that. If you haven't liked the video yet, I'd appreciate that as well. And I will see you in the next video when hopefully it's a little bit cooler and I can speak again because I've been recording now for about half an hour. Goodbye. Whoa.